Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari 8-bit games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former. This is Gridrunner by Jeff Minter. This is a game that was originally released in 1982 for the Commodore VIC-20, an 8-bit machine that Jeff Minter was quite fond of. The Atari 8-bit version that we're going to be seeing today followed a year later in 1983, along with a number of other ports. Gridrunner is one of Jeff Minter's longest running series, and in fact he's still pumping out installments for it today, with the most recent one being in 2018. The original VIC-20 version was written in just a week. In an interview with Beta.com, Jeff Minter described it as the best week of work that he's ever done. There are a few other more interesting snippets in that interview as well. Particularly some comments he made on game design in the 1980s and how it's a little bit different from today. I've got a good quote here. He said that in the 1980s, designers had to concentrate on the very essence of the gameplay experience and polish it to make it both satisfying and compelling enough to hold the player's attention and keep them coming back for another go. One couldn't satisfy the player cheaply by simply overwhelming him with nice graphics and audio. The execution of the game itself had to be what satisfies the player. So, shall we take a look at Gridrunner now and see if that satisfies the player without overwhelming the player with graphics and sound? Here we go. Okay, here we are with Gridrunner, a classic from Jeff Minter. This is actually one of Jeff Minter's longest running series. It's actually technically still going because there was a release last year in 2018. But this was where it all began. Originally on the VIC-20, as we've previously said. But this, of course, is the Atari 8-bit version. And as you may expect from Jeff Minter, if you're already familiar with his work, which we've previously seen Attack of the Mutant Camels on here, prepare for psychedelia, flashing colours, hypnotic patterns, and fun gameplay. So, as in Attack of the Mutant Camels, you can start where you like in this game. You don't have to start right at the beginning, but we will, just for the sake of me being rubbish. So every level begins this way with this big flashy grid, and then your ship appears, and then we're off. So, much like Attack of the Mutant Camels was inspired by an existing game, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back for Atari 2600 in that case, this, of course, is inspired by Centipede, as you can see. However, it was specifically designed to play a bit differently to Centipede, so it's a lot faster. It unfolds on a horizontally oriented playfield rather than a vertically oriented playfield like Centipede does. And you have a lot more things to think about at the same time. So the main consideration while you're playing this game is keeping clear of those cannons at the side of the screen. So one of them is firing these sort of seed things onto the grid. They probably have an official name, but I don't have the instructions to hand, so I couldn't tell you what it is. And then the one at the bottom is a railgun that fires at regular intervals. And so the seeds that appear, they will eventually grow and sprout into sort of bomb things that fall down the grid and kill you if they land on you. So you can destroy them, but obviously the more they've grown, the more you need to shoot them for them to actually be destroyed. So while you're trying to clear the level by actually defeating the Gridrunner itself, the centipede type thing, you need to make sure that the screen isn't getting too full of other obstacles as well, because they can really build up quickly if you're not careful. So that adds a sort of interesting element of strategy into the mix. And it's a little bit different from what Centipede did with its mushrooms, because Centipede, you started with all those mushrooms on the screen and you had to work around them. In this one, they're gradually appearing as you play the game. And they appear through a combination of both your actions and passing time as well. You'll notice when we destroy a chunk of the Gridrunner, just like when you destroy a chunk of the Centipede in Centipede, it becomes a mushroom. It becomes one of those seeds in this as well. And I cannot hit that bastard for shit, can I? There we go. So, like I mentioned earlier, there have been a number of versions of this over the years.
back when I was a kid, we had both this version and the Atari ST version, which technically is known as Super Gridrunner. We will almost certainly come to that on Atari ST A to Z at some point, because it's a long-standing favourite of mine. Because we had both the 8-bit version and the ST version at the same time, I actually kind of didn't like this version quite as much. But this is one of those games that's kind of grown on me over the years. I think I mostly just like the ST version a bit more because it was a lot flashier. The graphics were a lot nicer. I preferred the sound effects to a certain degree. And I just felt... oh dear. I just felt like there was a bit more variety to it. As the graphics and the backgrounds and stuff in that version were a bit more varied. You had power-ups and all sorts of other stuff in there as well. So that's a really good version. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't play this one either, because this is where it all began. And in many ways, this is thus the purest form of the Gridrunner formula, if you will. Or just a cracking good shoot 'em up for Atari 8-bit. Oh no! Doing really badly. But yeah, this is one of those games where it doesn't need to be any more complicated. Oh. Because apparently level 5 is impossible to defeat if you haven't played this game for a while, like I haven't. Right, you've got to listen for that timing, because you can use the audible cues to know when those shots are coming. Because they come at regular intervals. It's not like when you cross their path or anything like that. It is at regular intervals. So you've got to listen as well as watch. And sort of get a feel for the rhythm of what's going on. And make sure you are not standing somewhere that's going to get you killed. This is it. Level 5 is my limit, clearly. Isn't being old fun? To be honest, I don't think it's a being old thing so much as it is this game is quite hard. Oh dear me. There we go. So that's Gridrunner. Let's have another go at that. Let's see if we can do a little bit better. May the power of the grid preserve you. So in true arcade style, it does record your high score. It doesn't save it though, I don't believe. Most of Minter's games for the Atari 8-bit, and indeed the other platforms, came out on cassette. And cassette isn't a format that's particularly conducive to saving things like high scores and so on. A lot of disc-based games would save high scores, and in fact the pirate copy of this we had growing up was on disc. But it was basically just transferred from the tape version. There was some quite popular software around at the time called Transdisc, which would allow you to take a piece of software that was on cassette, basically extract it from the audio data on the cassette and turn it into a binary file that you could load from disk, which was nice. And that's probably what happened with this one. Oh my god! I'm not taking my own advice at all. I need to listen to the zappy noises. And just not be in the way. This might have been another reason I didn't like this game quite so much when I was a kid, because I think I could do a lot better at the ST version, because it's... I don't know if it's easier. I think it kind of eases you in a bit more gently than this one does, though. That said, this one is pretty accessible. You get an extra life for every level you successfully finished, which is very generous. Certainly a lot more generous than arcade games at the time. And it's just a case of seeing how long you can last, I guess. And you've got traditional old school arcade mechanics to deal with, such as only being able to have one bullet on screen at once. And thus being able to rapid fire if you shoot at something at very close range. That was always a favourite tactic of mine in sort of early fixed shooters. I still like it today, in fact. That's pew, 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 pew. Everyone loves a bit of rapid fire and dying. Nobody loves dying, I don't think. But, well, it's what happened there. Oh, no! Just to say, this has had a number of updates over the years for various platforms. Minter had something of a habit of supporting kind of lesser-known platforms, to put it politely. To put it less politely, he had a habit of supporting completely failed platforms. So, for example, he was one of the prominent developers on the Atari Jaguar. Don't think he did anything for the Lynx, but he was certainly interested in it. And certainly a few years back, he was very, very frustrated by the mobile gaming landscape. Because it was just sort of as the whole in-app purchase thing was starting to get big and everything was going free to play, and there almost didn't seem like there was a market for paid apps anymore. And meanwhile, he was very excited by the possibilities of iOS in particular. And he was putting out some really, really wonderful ports and original games for iOS, including a great version of Gridrunner, that kind of went back to the vertically oriented Tate style mode that the original Centipede would have used. And in fact, the whole aesthetic of that iOS version of Gridrunner was very much inspired by early arcade games, like early Atari and Namco arcade games in particular. I think it used the same font as those, for example. But yeah, poor old Jeff was getting really frustrated at one point. I follow him on Twitter, and certainly a good few years back, he was getting very upset by the fact that there just didn't seem to be a market for what he was doing anymore. And that's really sad, because he's a really legendary game creator who has put out, although a lot of his games are reimaginings of existing concepts, like we've talked about how this is based on Centipede and how Attack of the Mutant Camels was based on The Empire Strikes Back, and there's plenty of other examples you can cite, even in his weirdest sounding games. So, like Metagalactic Llamas Battle at the Edge of Time or something. No, not that one. No, Sheep in Space is the one I'm thinking of. That's very much Defender with a twist. But he's not cloning these games, is the thing. He's taking inspiration from them. And I don't mean that as like a euphemism for stealing ideas from them. I mean literally, he's taking inspiration from these games that he was playing since the early days of video games, and putting his own unique spin on them. So here in Gridrunner, we've got the timing aspect, we've got the grid gradually filling up with obstacles and various elements. We've got the sheer speed of it. We've got stuff falling on your head. And yeah, it's just been kind of a bummer to see the modern games industry leave such a creator behind. Because you'd think, sort of, you'd think he'd fit right in with the modern indie scene, wouldn't you? But, I don't know. I mean, having read various interviews with him, he's definitely his own person and likes to do things his own way, and I don't think he's necessarily the most social person, so the idea of interacting with the modern indie clique doesn't necessarily appeal to him. I mean, I don't mean to speak for him or anything like that, but frankly, I don't really want to interact with the modern indie clique either. But yeah. But at least he's still plugging away. There are still versions of Gridrunner being made. Jeff Minter is still working on things. If you have access to a PlayStation VR, then I can highly, highly recommend his game Polybius, which is one of his many spins on Tempest, basically. But it's got this wonderful sort of feeling of going on a psychedelic journey. So it's got sort of elements of Res in there as well as Tempest. It looks absolutely fabulous on the PlayStation VR. If you play with a good headset as well, the music is fantastic. TXK, I think it was called, on Vita as well, was magnificent. That actually was a version of Tempest, but it was an absolutely wonderful version of Tempest, so be sure to play that if you have the hardware to do so. And yeah, of course, his back catalogue is well worth spending some time with as well, and it's never been easier to do that because Jeff is actually one of those creators who's quite happy for his old stuff to be shared, because I mean, he's not making any money from these old games anymore. No shops are selling copies of Gridrunner and Attack of the Mutant Camels and Hover Bother and stuff like that anymore. And so, if I remember correctly, I believe his website actually hosts a lot of versions of his old games that you can just download and play in an emulator of choice, or if you have the hardware to do so, then you can even play them on the original hardware if you want to. So, I mean, obviously you miss out on the fun and games of having an original copy then, like, so you can't look at the instructions, and Jeff Minter instruction manuals were always quite fun. But yeah, at least he's made an effort to archive his own stuff, which is more than can be said for a lot of other creators. And I think that's quite nice, really. I mean, it's easy to see that sort of thing as arrogant, but I think it's really important that a creator takes pride in their work, and years after the fact, be able to archive this stuff, pull it out and show people, yeah, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, this is what I was doing. This is where gaming was. This is what gaming meant to me at the time. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who could draw some inspiration from that. I've certainly always greatly respected him for being someone who sticks to the things he believes in, who doesn't care what people think of him. There's a wonderful, wonderful interview with him on beta.com, in which he makes some fairly shocking admissions. I mean, without sort of explicitly stating things, he does make some relatively shocking admissions, but the impression you just get is, well, this is who I am, and you're going to have to deal with it. Which is cool. And if you follow him on Twitter now, you'll get plenty of updates of him being on the train about his most recent curries and about how bad the people on those trains smell. Which is very entertaining. Level 5. This is impossible. This is literally impossible. This will be the last attempt for now. Come on, we can do this. Concentrate, avoid the falling thing, shoot the... Oh no. Right, come on, this time. 3 lives left. There's nothing difficult about this. It's easy. It's simple. Oh, every time! Right, I got this. 2 lives left. We're going for it. Nailed it. 1 life left. We got this. Watch this, everybody. The panic. No! Oh dear. I don't think my blood pressure can take anymore. But anyway, that's Gridrunner from 1983 by Jeff Minter. As I say, we'll probably revisit the ST version of this at some point, Super Gridrunner. It's actually surprisingly different from this version, rather than being a straight port. So, yeah, please look forward to that, I guess. So, for now, I'll just say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.